Hi, everybody. I'm Nomi Joyrich, and I am the Michigan Director for Jews for a Secular Democracy. We are a 501(c)(3) organization. We do not support any particular party or candidate for office, and we ask all the panelists and moderators to respect this during this webinar. This will be recorded and put on our webpage, and clips may be used for social media. If you have an AI note taker, we do ask that you turn that off, though, unless you need it for accessibility. I want to thank our sponsors and our co-sponsors, which is Rabbi Joseph H. Gumbiner Community Action Project, the Tucson Jewish Museum and Holocaust Center, Temple Israel of Greater Orlando, Florida Now, Arizona Faith Network, Folkshul in Philadelphia, NCJW of Greater Miami, NCJW of Arizona, the Congregation for Humanistic Judaism of Metro Detroit, or ADAM, Secular Humanistic Jewish Circle of Tucson, and Secular Arizona. So thank you so much for all of the sponsors and co-sponsors who help make this possible. I'm going to introduce our moderators, and then our moderators will introduce John. Our first moderator, Lynn Davis, is a powerful convener and collaborator who believes firmly in the power of partnership to build vibrant, inclusive community. As director of the museum's Rabbi Joseph H. Gumbiner Community Action Project, she collaborates with individuals, agencies, and organizations across the state of Arizona and across the nation to promote civic engagement and protect human rights. Lynn has spent the bulk of her career in nonprofit arts and administration and Jewish communal life, creating value-based programming that amplifies the work of local artists, engages audiences, and celebrates the diversity of Southern Arizona. Welcome, Lynn. Lynn is joined by Reverend Ellie Hutchison, who serves as the Southern Arizona faith-rooted community organizer with the Arizona Faith Network and is ordained by the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries. They currently serve as a minister for pastoral care in a Southern Arizona United Church of Christ Church. Additionally, they conduct religious services inside Perryville and Florence prisons. They bring a wealth of experience as an educator, community co-creator and organizer, poet and writer, and liberation theologian. Ellie spent more than 15 years as a creative writing and poetry teacher throughout the Philadelphia and Phoenix communities and utilizes embodiment practices to engage in difficult conversations. Welcome, Lynn and Ellie.
Thank you,
And
Nomi. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, our co-sponsors and Jews for a Secular Democracy for putting this together. It's really a joy to be with everyone again. We did get to do this in person in Tucson just a couple weeks ago, and this is really a treat to have a reprise. Our guest this evening is John Fugelsang, and John is the author of the New York Times bestseller, Separation of Church and Hate, A Sane Person's Guide to Taking Back the Bible from Fundamentalists, Fascists, and Flock-Fleecing Frauds. Could come up with an easier title next time, I think.
Oh, you say it beautifully.
He's been murdered on CSI and picketed by the Westboro Baptist Church. He's a Drama League nominated actor, comedian, and broadcaster who's hosted many TV shows and podcasts, including the acclaimed Tell Me Everything series on Sirius XM Progress. He's gotten George Harrison to give his final performance on VH1, debated Jerry Falwell and David Duke, not at the same time, I asked, and made many appearances on MSNBC, Fox News, and CNN. His epic PBS road trip film On the American Dream, Dream On, directed by Roger Weisberg, was named Best Documentary at the New York Independent Film Festival. He lives in New York City with his family. Welcome,
Thank you
John.
so
Nice to
much.
see you again.
Thank you so much. It's really a joy and a pleasure and an honor to see you again. Thank you very much for lowering your standards this deeply yet again.
Not at all. Not at all. So your latest book is titled Separation of Church and Hate, A Sane Person's Guide to Taking Back the Bible from Fundamentalists, Fascists, and Flock-Fleecing Frauds. How does an actor and comedian decide to tackle this? I mean, to write a book, and to tackle this topic?
It's a great question. I mean, I'm hardly qualified. Well, I am a talk radio host, and conservative media has taught me if you have a radio show and a lot of opinions, you're an expert, apparently, and can publish all the books you want. So I want to thank the Glenn Becks that came before me. But I grew up in an abnormally Christian household. My parents are both ex-clergy. My father had been a Franciscan brother who wore the Jedi robes and taught history to Catholic boys in Brooklyn. My mother was a nun. She grew up in the segregated South, entered the convent right after high school, became a nurse, and they sent her off to work with lepers in Malawi, Africa. My father, the brother, met my mother, the sister, fell madly in love. Carried a torch for her for 10 years while she was off in Africa and eventually got her to leave. And so we were raised abnormally Catholic in my home. Extremely Catholic. I think I say in the book, we had open casket reunions. It was very Catholic. And I was raised to believe that Christianity was supposed to be about the stuff that the Jewish carpenter from Judea, Jesus, talked about. Service to others, helping the marginalized. How you treat the lowest is how you treat him. Put away your sword, for he who lives by the sword will die by the sword. Stop executing people. Pay your taxes. In Matthew 25, Jesus, in the judgment of nations, the parable of the goats and the sheep, it's where he gives his marching orders for individuals and nations. And his criteria for how you're going to be judged is very simple: how you cared for the poor, cared for the sick, welcomed the stranger, and took care of people in prison. And like millions, I grew up to find this religion that I thought was about peace and empathy had been hijacked by a mean white supremacist, tax-free right-wing clique. And I came to feel it was the meanness that was driving so many people away from religion, and the fundamentalism, which I think is the thing that is spoiling all the world's great religions. When our atheist friends complain about, oh, religion's responsible for oppression of women and it's responsible for violence and war and homophobia and bloodshed, and I can't deny that, but it's usually historically the fundamentalist wings of all the world's great religions. The overwhelming majority of moderate and liberal Jews, Muslims, and Christians are getting along just fine right now. They're forming businesses and making families and going to school together and not causing all these dramas. That's the fundamentalists. So I grew up in this, and as a comedian, I liked to talk about it. And at a young age, I began appearing on Bill Maher a lot and debating various figures like Falwell and David Duke. And this book was something I carried in me for a long time and tried to pitch, and it met a lot of resistance. I had publishers say to me, wait, this is a book for atheists and believers? How does it work? And it's a guidebook for anyone of any background, including atheist brothers and sisters, who's going to have to deal with a hardcore Christian nationalist or fundamentalist and their family, their job, their government, their school board. And it takes all the issues that divide us and shows how, on most of the issues that divide us, the far right is against the actual teachings of that Jesus they talk about so bombastically. So I think we do better when we ask questions rather than hurl insults. And it's designed to get you asking the right questions. And when you must debate someone like this, I think it's much better to point to what the scripture says. And I know I've gone on a long time, but I think you get a lot farther showing your right-wing loved ones that in the Bible, where Jesus wasn't a homophobic immigrant hater, than if you just call your right-wing loved ones a homophobic immigrant hater. So after many years
Yes.
of rejection, I finally sold it, and we made the New York Times list the first 2 months, which was really lovely after 13 years of being told there was no audience for this book.
So it sounds like people are hungry for the conversation.
I think so. I think they say the largest growing religious demographic are some say it's Mormons, some say it's Islam, some say it's none of the aboves. I think we have a large growing religious demographic in this country that no one talks about, and that's folks who were raised religious and now think of themselves as spiritual because they're so turned off to so much of the cruelty out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love, your approach, not only just in life, John. Lynn read through your bio and had this wonderful litany of things that you have done. And for me, what stands out is thinking about your different approaches, the ways in which you invite people into conversation. And it never, and this is really highlighted in your book, it's never about the right or the wrong. It's really, just as you just said in your answer, it's about the engagement. You're inviting people to be curious, and curiosity, we can find where we are in that liminal space of being both right and wrong. Why do you feel that different approaches are the best? And then, you touched on it just briefly by saying, the Matthew text. When do you bring in biblical text, if at all?
I bring it in constantly, because we are right now controlled by a Christian nationalist government that does what governments have done for 1700 years. Since Rome first co opted the Jesus movement, which was a group of nonviolent Jews who followed Jesus's radical strand of Reform Judaism. And once the Roman Empire co opted it and made it a state religion, that began this very long, bloody tradition of, well, I call it doing the opposite of Jesus for Jesus. So you'll see the Crusades, where Muslims and Jews and pagans are slaughtered, but we're doing it for God. For God, it's for Jesus, really. And of course, it wasn't. It was violent, bloody conquest. But religion began giving empire a permission structure. When you have a religious figure, some guy in a funny dress and a hat who's going to stand there and say some sacred words and consecrate your violence, it's essential if you're trying to get Christians on your side to do something that's the opposite of everything the extremely anti-violence Jesus talked about. We saw this with Columbus. They were slaughtering the Taino people and torturing them, but in the shadow of the cross. We're doing this for the cross. Slavery and the ethnic cleansing of indigenous people were justified because we're bringing Jesus to them. And we know that being saved didn't save them. And we're seeing it right now with this war in Iran, which is not popular. It's not conservative. It's deeply unchristian. It doesn't even meet the just war doctrine, which I'm not a big fan of in the first place. And you see this Secretary of Defense bringing in these Christian crusader clowns into the Pentagon, where people like Doug Wilson, who thinks women shouldn't vote and slavery was a beautiful thing and that slaves had a happy life. His pastor, who was praying for the death of James Tallarico, he'll bring in, it's the same thing Rome did. You bring in these Christian figures to say sacred words, and somehow they are blessing your violence. It's one of the oldest, bloodiest cons in Christianity. And again, it's the consistent theme for 1700 years of empire. Do the opposite of Jesus, but say you're doing it for Jesus. And they're fake Christians because throughout history, there has always been a Christ following resistance. And when I say Christ followers, I also mean Christians with their allies, with their Jewish allies, their atheist and secular allies, their Muslim allies. We've seen it when the Crusades were happening, and St. Francis stood up and held up a Bible and said, "No, you can't have this kind of war." And he walked unarmed through a war zone to host peace talks with a Muslim sultan. We saw it with Columbus. The first act of protest by a white person in our hemisphere was the Catholic priest on Columbus's boat, who wrote back to the Queen to protest the way the Taino people were being treated. We saw it in slavery when they propped it up with a Bible, and you had the Quakers and Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman standing against it. Hitler was the ultimate Christian nationalist, and martyrs like Dietrich Bonhoeffer gave his life and called out what was happening to his Jewish brothers and sisters. Segregation was propped up by Christianity, and there's Dr. King quoting the New Testament to shame white America out of this mutually assured destruction of apartheid. Throughout the entire history of Christianity, there's always been an incredible resistance, but it's always been a resistance to Christian authoritarianism. So my book is not anti-Christian in any way. It's obnoxiously pro-Jesus, pro-scripture, pro being nice to each other. It's anti-hypocrite. And I got really tired of seeing my parents' religion of love and empathy used to whitewash the exact rank opposite. Most people just do whatever they want to do, and they try to pick and choose the scripture to justify it. And we're allowed to call that out.
Thank you.
I'll try to make my answers shorter. These are great
No,
questions.
no. People are here to hear from you, not us. So it's all
Well,
yours.
I don't know about that. I got to do an event with these women, and they're quite brilliant. So thank you.
Thank you. In the work that we do at Tucson Jewish Museum and Holocaust Center, especially through the Gumbiner Community Action Project, we talk a lot about the importance or how important democratic norms have been for the safety and security of Jews in this country and, and other marginalized communities.
Yeah,
Um, Specifically, especially the separation of church and state, protections for religious freedom, minority rights. And I find myself asking kind of on the daily, like, where's that gone? Like, why are we not talking about it? And why aren't more people holding that up as one of the, holding the tenets of democracy, democratic norms, as one of those things like absolutely fundamentally essential to all of our safety and security. So whether it's marginalized communities, whether it's, women's rights, voting rights, like you name it, I feel like we're just letting these things erode in front of our eyes.
I agree. I agree. I think we're too distracted by too many screens. And maybe, humans are the kind of primates where things sometimes have to get worse before we notice and make it better again. But as far as I'm concerned, the separation of church and state is the conservative point of view. It is what the founders wanted, and they wrote it down more than once. We're never intended to be a Christian nation. Now, that's the backbone of Christian nationalism's con. To them, that sounds like heresy. Of course, we've only had Christian presidents, and the majority of citizens are Christian, and they swear their oath on the Bible, and politicians and preachers cry out God's name when they're having sex with their mistresses. Of course, we're a Christian nation, right? But the founders never wanted that. And they wrote it down first in the Virginia Statute of Religious Freedom. Jefferson and Madison was a big fan. Then we had the Constitution. Then we had the Bill of Rights. Then the Treaty of Tripoli, which came after that, where we were being attacked by pirates on the Barbary Coast, the Musselmen or Muslims, and the fledgling American nation knew that capitalism and commerce was important to getting our feet off the ground economically, and you couldn't be having these kind of conflicts with other faiths. So the Treaty of Tripoli was originated by George Washington and signed by John Adams in Article 11, where they're trying again to make peace with Muslims because nonviolence is really good for business. And that's where Washington and Adams ratified it. The government of the United States is in no way founded upon the Christian religion. This was done to bring out greater equality, to stop injustice, and to help us deal with pirates. And they take the one letter to the Danbury Baptists and try to say that, oh, this was never intended. But it's rubbish. If you look in the Constitution, if you look through it, and again, the founders had many flaws. They were slave owners talking about freedom. They were practicing ethnic cleansing against the indigenous people. They did not include women in their democracy. But the founders got something very simple and very moral, just right. A system under which the government cannot dictate how you pray or whether you should pray at all. And that's why our official religion is all and or none. It's supposed to be there to protect all others. The founders were very, very wise in this for all their many, many flaws. And it's worked, and it will continue to work if we want it. But Christian nationalism is dependent on us disregarding this and saying, no, no, it was always meant to be a Christian nation, which is complete rubbish. The founders were deists. Most of them didn't really believe in an active God. They thought God was more like the CEO who's not there and doesn't come to the Zoom meetings, but he started the business. And so, we're trying to govern the country by natural laws. That's what guided them. Enlightenment thinkers like John Locke. They wrote extensively about all the bloody horror that was brought by religion. And this is the legacy of Rome. When you mix power with religion, you will get violence. Authoritarian government mixing with extreme conservative religious people is literally what killed Jesus.
Yes, you're preaching. You got to come to church, John. You know, one of the things I got an opportunity last October to attend the a conference at the Center for Action and Contemplation with Richard Rohr, Diana
Oh,
Butler
wow.
Bass. It was just like goosebumps, right? And
Amazing.
one
I
of the
just saw her the other
things,
night. I was doing stand up in DC. I was doing a fundraiser for someone, and Diana came to the show, and Richard Rohr was my mom's favorite author.
oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I'm like geeking out now. I get
Yeah.
you here and those two. We were meant to be in the same circles, apparently.
Well, a boy could
No,
dream.
I didn't get to actually talk to them. But one of the things that Diana Butler Bass shared during that time was like, when thinking about just how Christianity and spirituality and religious nationalism across the world is thought of, when getting when finding yourself in conversation with someone, it's really important to ask them, and you kind of hinted to this just now. She said it's really important to ask them, when do they think that America was founded? Because
When?
if it's the start, if the start of your story is 1776 versus 1619, you're going
Mm,
to have this very
that's true.
interesting view of what our religion may or may not be. And so I'm curious, in particular, because you and Lynn just had this wonderful back and forth about voices being, or 1400s or prehistory. I mean, like founded, right? I use founded. Let's be real, right? When white folks came aboard.
Yeah.
Um, but it really thinking about the voices that have been left out. So if we
Yeah.
talk about what our religious leanings are, where we start our story, you actually touch a bit on the prevalence of women's voices among the subject matter experts that you cite in your book. You mentioned the strong women around Jesus, and then actually you talk about how women have been powerful and uplifting in your life. So, thinking about where we start our story, can you share a little bit more about why you thought including the stories of women's voices as subject matter experts in your book was
Wow,
important?
I'm so glad you asked about this because when I was writing the book, I tried to have, a different chapter for all the things that divide us. And I had the LGBTQ chapter, and I had the abortion rights chapter, and the poverty chapter, and the healthcare policy chapter, and the guns, and um and I realized very early on, there's this real tendency to say, "Oh, the abortion chapter covers everything." And of course it does not. And Jesus, I would say, is one of the great feminists of the Bible. And for me, I soon realized I had to have another chapter just on "Thou shalt not hate feminists." And my original editor at Simon and Schuster came to me and said that chapter's got to be a lot sooner in the book. And she convinced me and I realized, yeah, you're right. Like that chapter is more important than the abortion chapter. It's bigger. It touches on everything. And this was when I was young. It was really I'd say the second issue that radicalized me. The first was the death penalty, and then it was that I was a part of a church that venerated the Virgin Mary, but didn't think she was worthy of saying mass. That I belonged to a church, and my mother had belonged to a church where women were institutionalized as second-class citizens. No knob, no job, as I like to say, and that I got this bothered me a lot because if God loves men and women equally, then God is a feminist. That's it, right? I am not a feminist. Feminists think men and women are equal. I don't believe that. I'm a female supremacist. And quite frankly, I'm tired of waiting for the women to hurry up and take over everything already, please. But the older I got, the more it bothered me, the double standard of women in the priesthood. And to see other congregations and to see our Jewish brothers and sisters so far ahead of us. And when you consider the misogyny of Jesus's day, modern Judaism is way beyond the Christians on this. So it's something that I learn a lot from seeing how Jews have led on this issue compared to how it was in the time of the Bible. Um, Women have it rough. The world Jesus was born into, women were property. All inheritance was through the male line. Women were unclean in the eyes of God under many, many conditions. Menstruation, if you touched a woman who was menstruating, you were unclean in the eyes of God. If a woman has a baby, she's unclean. If it's a female baby, she's unclean for twice as long. And one of the things that I really loved about the Jesus story as a kid that became so much more in focus for me writing this book was that Jesus broke all those taboos and that he shows up and treats women as equals. He had women in his ministry. The men who wrote the Bible say, well, there's 12 apostles. There's 3 women that go everywhere with these guys. But the men said, oh, it's 12 apostles and 3 groupies. The women are the only ones who don't abandon Jesus. The women are the first ones he appears to when he comes back in the story. I don't ask anyone to take the Bible as literal fact, atheist friends, just so you know. I just go by the story we've all agreed to. There are so many instances that when you're a kid, you go to church and you learn these stories of the bleeding woman, or the woman, the Samaritan woman at the well, or Mary and Martha, and Jesus and the apostles are over, and Martha's doing the housework and she's angry, and they're all presented to kids, much like the whole Jesus story, with an empire occupying the Holy Land, devoid of any context. We learn these stories before we understand why they're revolutionary. The bleeding woman. She'd been bleeding for a dozen years. She had been to every doctor in the world. She goes out and she hears Jesus is coming. She wants to touch the hem of his garment. She does. He says, "Who touched me?" She goes, "Oh, it was me." He goes, "Well, daughter, your faith has healed you." And it's a nice story. Sam Cooke did a great song about it. We're not told that that woman was breaking every law of her culture by going out in public. She was rendering everyone else in the crowd ritually unclean. She made Jesus unclean in the eyes of God. She broke this taboo. Jesus turns around and shatters it for good. And when he says, "Daughter, your faith has healed you," it's the only time he ever calls anybody daughter in the whole book. And it's said to a ritually unclean woman who just broke the law to make him unclean as well. He shatters the taboo. It's amazing that right-wing guys think they're on the same side as this man. With the story of Mary and Martha, the apostles are all over. Martha's doing the housework. Mary's sitting at Jesus' feet learning. Martha's mad. "Why am I doing all the work?" And Jesus says, "Hey, chill out. You're stressing everybody out, Martha." I'm a kid hearing that. I feel bad for Martha hearing this story. She's doing all the work. When you're older and you realize what the story really is, that women weren't allowed to be educated. Jesus was breaking the law by teaching her sister. When Mary is described as sitting at Jesus's feet, that shows her as the prize pupil to the rabbi. And Jesus essentially tells Martha, education is more important than housework. It's not really a surprise why they don't want kids to know the real meaning behind the story, when so much of this patriarchy is dependent on convincing girls that their virtue relies on traditional biblical roles of womanhood. So much of it is weak men trying to keep women in a box for 2,000 years. And none of that comes from Jesus. He broke those taboos, then he dies. Paul takes over the whole operation, and Paul's hang-ups about women are quite famous and bled into the work. So anyone who wants to justify women as a second-class citizen in the Christian church has got to ignore Jesus and go beyond him to Paul, who is not Jesus. Paul has many great qualities, writes beautifully about love. He really ran the startup, but he is not Jesus. And right-wing guys who are uncomfortable with the woke level of Jesus are much more comfortable quoting Paul, and they do.
So what I'm hearing is that a lot of these stories have been co-opted in the interest of control and power. And it seems like that's where a lot of stories end up. But why do you think Christian nationalism is having a moment? And why don't we hear more news outlets, more media outlets talking about it explicitly in those terms?
Those are two huge questions. I'll do the second one first. The media doesn't talk about it because it's not good for ratings. I mean, they're terrified. I will always respect Bill Maher, because Bill Maher was having me on his show to talk about this stuff when nobody else would. My liberal friends get angry with me because I go on Joe Scarborough, but Joe Scarborough invites me on to talk about this stuff because most media is terrified of this. Corporate media is responsible to shareholders and ratings. And I grew up working in television, and people are terrified that you might offend somebody in Iowa. So religion is a third rail. My managers and agents for years begged me to stop talking about religion on stage as a stand-up, because it's hard to get it on the air. You really can't get it on the air, and it's a dead end financially. But for me, it was a calling, and the Democratic Party is not going to do it. I'm not a Democrat, by the way, but they're not going to use the Bible to call out hypocrisy. They're terrified the way the media is terrified. So it falls to everyone else to point out that hate is not a Christian value. As far as Christian nationalism, I don't really think it's that new. I think it's been the struggle of Christianity for 1,700 years. It's been the struggle of America since Columbus, before 1619. It has been the struggle of worship of Caesar and power over following the teachings of Jesus, which reject power. Jesus was no kings before that was trendy. Satan offered him to be king of the world. He said no. After the miracle of loaves and fishes, the Nazarenes try to make him their king. He goes off to a mountain to be alone. He was not about power at all. He was about going to the margins. And that is useless for empire. You need people to get behind a war like Jesus, or a Jesus who worships authority. It's one of the reasons why they quote Paul more. We're in this moment now because in the 1970s, the right wing Christian movement realized that they couldn't use racism anymore. Jerry Falwell had been a segregationist. He opened up whites only schools. And after the civil rights movement and after the Voting Rights Act, the fundamentalists had lost some of their mojo. And they spent most of the 70s in the wilderness, the fundamentalists did. The biggest issue they had was opposing Jimmy Carter's IRS. Because in the 1970s, Jimmy Carter tried to take tax exempt status away from colleges and universities that still practiced racial segregation. In Ronald Reagan's 1980 campaign, he talked more about Jimmy Carter's IRS than abortion. But it wasn't really working by the late 70s. Bringing back segregation was not going to happen, and these guys had to find a new gimmick. And they found it 5 years after Roe v. Wade. When Roe v. Wade was decided, it was not controversial. That was what the Catholics cared about. No one else did. The most controversial thing was how not controversial it was. The Southern Baptist Convention voted to affirm women's reproductive freedoms after Roe v. Wade. And Jerry Falwell never mentioned it in a single sermon until 5 years later. But once they did, around 1978, around the midterms, they realized that this could be a gold mine. And and Ronald Reagan had signed the most liberal abortion law in California state history as governor, but he flipped and began saying, "Oh, it's murder, it's murder." George H.W. Bush, his running mate, had always supported women's reproductive rights. And the day Reagan asked Bush to be his running mate, Bush flipped. "Oh, it's murder, it's murder." So now, Jesus, by the way, I'm not going to say he's pro abortion, but the Bible never bans it. Exodus asserts that a fetus is property and a woman's life has more value in God's eye, Exodus 21. I'm not saying Jesus would be a clinic escort on the weekends, but I don't think Jesus would get behind incarcerating people or having the state force women to be pregnant against their will or having the state force rape victims to be pregnant by their attacker against their will. There's nothing in all of Scripture that backs any of that behavior up. It's controlling women, and it always works. And so for 45 years, they have run this incredible con on our society, not in the European church, but here. They got the followers of Jesus to vote against everything Jesus talked about by talking about abortion, which Jesus never talked about. And abortion, criminalizing abortion, has eaten Christianity in this country. You ask anyone, what's Donald Trump done that's remotely Christ-like? He got abortion banned. No, Jesus is against the death penalty. He never speaks on abortion. But this is the power of empire. This is how they've done it. This is Christian nationalism. So that's how we got here. And now, of course, you see with this Hegseth cabinet, Christian language, institutions, and symbols that are always used to justify war and violence and oppression. And again, from the Crusades, the 30 Years' War, the religious defense of slavery in the South, Christianity is invoked in service of power, right? The problem is, and this is what no one talks about in the media or the Democratic Party, invoked is not the same as followed. Jesus is this first century Jew who says, "Love your enemies, bless those who persecute you, turn the other cheek." So these other political movements have to wrap themselves in Christian identity while they're fighting for domination and hierarchy and control. And that is Christian nationalism. It is not Christianity. It is a completely different thing. And it needs to be called out as fake, because otherwise you're putting Martin Luther King and the KKK in the same basket. Oh, Christianity.
Yeah. Which is you talk about just the wide range of that. You have these other spectrums, and that can be the beauty of a faith. It can be the beauty of a faith to have extremes, but only when you're able to come together and to be curious and to explore and
I
to
agree.
ask questions. And I think a lot about how you wrote this book, to how listening to a couple of the interviews that you've done. You use history, you use theology, you use the arts, storytelling, all of these unique ways in which to try to engage people into a difficult topic. What
Thank you.
advice, what advice, and sarcasm, which I love, it's my love language. So how is it that you can, like, what advice would you offer to the average person to have these conversations? And I'll say that, I'll say that, but I want to come and say, like, last summer I got to vacation. I was in North Carolina. These people came up and we were listening to this great blues music at this brewery, and the family said, hey, come on, sit down. You look tired. I was like, yeah, we sat down. We talked for like 35 minutes, a great conversation. We found out that we had some odd connections, small world, all of this stuff. And then when I was like, oh, I got to get up and help my friend's dad who was in the band, pack up and stuff. And they're like, can we have a hug? And I'm like, absolutely. And the fact that they asked consent was awesome. And then
Yeah.
the second thing was that by their attire from t-shirt to belt buckle to boots to bandanas and everything down were completely different than what I would have thought I was having a conversation with.
What
And
were they?
so, well, they were supporters of a political party that I may not be.
I just, but y'all got along and you were lovely to them and they were lovely to you.
Yeah. So I just was stuck. I'm like, oh, I wonder if they know who they're hugging. Because I clearly know who I'm hugging. Do
Yeah.
they know who they're hugging?
Yeah.
And it didn't matter. And I think that that's what it came down to. So beyond having a
I kind
beer
of
and
wish they
listening to
knew
blues
though.
music,
I kind of wish they knew though. But
look,
that's
tell
just me.
me.
You know, I
Me
kind of wish
too,
they
me
knew that they had
too.
broken bread and got along with someone that their media tells them they're supposed to hate.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Because
Yeah,
that's the only way it's
exactly.
going to happen is by heart to heart, person to person, eye contact, smiling, warmth, actually reaching across the table,
Yeah.
and refusing to hate them back.
Yeah.
And that was Jesus's whole thing.
Mhm.
Turn the other cheek is him breaking the cycles of retribution, breaking the cycles of hatred. His whole thing is anti-revenge. I mean, literally, he walks to his own execution and begs God to forgive the people who are murdering him. His whole thing is like, we know violence and hate doesn't work. I'm breaking it. You don't have to get the last word in. You know who wins the fight? The one who walks away from fighting first. And that's revolutionary. It was especially revolutionary where people were waiting for a Messiah who would overthrow this Roman Empire. And so he sent a lot of conflicting signals. Folks thought, oh, he's going to be the one. But he was doing something very different. He was talking about overthrowing empire, but not in the violent ways that we generally would think about it. And I think you modeled it beautifully. And I really mean that. You have to model it because I'm half Southern, half Brooklyn. I grew up where I go down south for the summer and they talk about Yankees and hate us, and I come back home and they talk about rednecks and hate us. And I saw as a child how this country is geared towards getting us to hate each other. And that's politics. And that's a lot of political media as well. And it's boring and it's depressing and it's awful for this country. And look, we had a civil war where we killed 600,000 of us. We have come a long way. It's been worse than people being jerks on Twitter. But you modeled the gospel, and I just wish that in the end they had found out that they had given and received love from whatever it is you are that's so different from them.
That's beautiful, both of you. I've been in a lot of conversations lately, like in recent months, the last year, about where's the prophetic rabbinical voice in this moment? And I can name a few,
Yes.
right? But like where are the prophetic, where's clergy? Like where's clerical leadership? Where are faith leaders in this like really difficult, fraught moment that seems to, I mean, seems right for all the, for all the teachings, right? You name it. Seems like they too should be having a moment. And when I talk to individual clergy, I hear things like, well, my congregation's not a monolith. Immigration is divisive. This, that, or this, that, or the other thing is divisive. And,
Yeah.
I need to talk to all of them.
It's
And,
the same
and
problem the
so,
media has. Same problem the media has. You
yeah,
don't want to
no,
lose the audience.
100%, 100%. But like part of me feels like if you're not showing up to church. I mean, I actually, true story, have a friend who's a Methodist minister who had, longtime congregation member, large donor, actually leave her congregation because they were tired of hearing about love on Sundays.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
But
Ellie, I'm not
yeah.
naming names, um,
Yeah.
but
But that's it, right? Pope Leo. It's like, look, I'm here to preach the gospel. You
oh,
don't like
that
it,
is
leave.
that. I mean, we could spend a whole other like that's so wild.
Yeah.
Um, But, and Ellie and I are both in community organizing spaces, Ellie much longer than I. And one of the things we talk about in organizing is how do you bring numbers together, right? Like instead of just bringing an individual, how do you bring a group? So there's a lot
Yeah.
of outreach to congregations, to institutions, right? You want to mobilize 300 people instead of 3 people. And I think one of those ways is like reminding those people that the person standing up in front of the crowd should be a trusted voice,
Yes.
right? But how do you empower? What are your suggestions for empowering those people to use that trusted voice to really like remind folks why we have butts in seats on Friday night or Sunday morning or whatever it
Yeah,
is?
I mean, this is the challenge. You're so right, Rabbi. What do you do? Do you play it safe and try to appeal to everyone? I mean, we see this in politics, we see this in media with ratings, and we see it in churches with not wanting to lose congregants. Jesus commands us to welcome the stranger. Am I going to lose my flock if I talk too much Jesus? It's one of the reasons why I do respect this Pope so much because growing up Catholic in this country, you realize, oh, they send the liberal popes to the liberal zip codes, and they send the conservative popes to the conservative zip codes. Because at the end of the day, the game is how much money can you get these nice people to put in the basket on Sunday? A lot of it's casting. So, keeping that in mind, that there are ways to stand up for what you believe without alienating those on the other side and include them in love. And I think, yeah, bringing it back to Jesus for the Christians and stressing the teachings of Jesus, even with the most right wing person, can we agree that this is about compassion, that this is about service, that this is about humility? We can agree on that, right? I wrote this book just so people would have the scripture handy to begin having these conversations and build these bridges. But at the end of the day, in the case of Christian nationalism, they don't care about religious freedom. They don't care about the teachings of Jesus. They don't care about fighting for the Lord. They don't care about beating Satan. They care about conservative Christian control over society. That's what they care about. They care about power. And that has always been the struggle. So if you're going to try and push a pure thing about Jesus and his teachings, you're going to see racists and sexists and billionaires leave the room. And that's the compromise you've got to make. So if you can make it entertaining and warm and have something there for everyone, when I go on stage, if I'm going to do political material for a mixed house, I got to have something there for everybody else too. I can't just go out there and beat up on the people I want to beat up on. And so it's you got to be authentic. And you have to decide what's more important, building a community where I don't take any brave stands because it's about, the bottom line, or is it more important to stand up for what I believe in, even if that means I have a smaller flock? I mean, integrity has a price. And when Jesus says, I didn't come to bring peace, I came to bring a sword, he's not talking about a literal weapon for bloodshed. He's saying that if you follow this movement, if you walk this narrow way of love and compassion, it's going to cost you something. You're going to lose friends and family when you devote yourself to the less fortunate. They're going to think you're crazy. They're going to call you a communist. They're going to leave you. But that's the choice. If you're going to walk with integrity and stand for the least of us, then you got to accept the fact that there'll be some hits to your popularity along the way. And finding that balance is how movements get built and how change happens. I mean, Martin Luther
Yeah.
King really, he pissed off plenty of the guys in SNCC who didn't want to hear all this church talk.
Look, MLK pissed off a lot of people, and
Yes, he did.
modern day people are very like, wait, what? I thought,
But
um,
again, but
I
like Jesus, he's a marble statue now. We don't have to know what he stood for. We just worship him. We take a holiday. We know he's a
yep,
great man. At the time he
yep,
died, MLK was as focused on anti-war and organized labor as he was on
yeah,
civil rights. And that's 2/3 of his legacy that they have tried to whitewash for almost 60 years because okay, racism will give you this, but don't bring up labor, don't bring up anti-war. We don't want to go that far. That's the power of this kind of ethics. The
yeah,
teachings of Jesus are, I'm not asking people to believe in divinity or anything like that, but the teachings of Jesus are as threatening to authoritarian power today as they were 1700 years ago, 2000 years ago. The nonviolent teachings of Jesus as another way. Pilate's there. He's like, I'm going to give you your life or kill you. Just say you love Caesar. And Jesus is like, my kingdom is not of this world. I
yeah,
mean, that is as threatening today as it was back then. And you see it with
yeah,
certain high ranking figures in government very angry at a pope because he quoted Jesus.
yeah,
That's all the guy's
yeah.
done.
That's always done. I want to invite the beloveds. I know I see chat going, and thank you for the interaction and the crowdsourcing happening on chat. But you actually have a Q&A feature, and that would make it
Yay.
much easier for us to be able to. We want to hear from you, right? And so, how you find your Q&A feature is if you're on a computer, a laptop, or even your phone, you can go to the bottom of the screen. It looks like a dialogue bubble with a question mark in it. See, somebody put it in there. I
Many
love it,
great
love it,
questions.
love
Yeah, I
it.
see.
Yeah, so keep it coming. And I'm gonna go back and address that question that was just put in. But John, I'm gonna ask real quick, where have you noticed change? Like, have you noticed in your work since coming out with this book, since speaking publicly about it in so many different avenues, have you noticed change?
Well, the book's only been out 6 months, but yes, I have. I mean, look at the religious battles we're having right now. Again, not to hammer too much about this pope versus this particular Speaker of the House and Vice President and President and Secretary of Defense, but I mean, I've seen so much change in my lifetime. It's so easy to become negative about all this, and I'm not an optimist. I am not an optimist. I'm a recovering cynic. And I like to say, it may seem like things are getting worse. And economically, I'll agree they are. I mean, 45 years of trickle down and the middle class is at the top of the bottom. I'm not going to argue anything like that. But if you had told me in the 1990s that we would see marriage equality for our tax-paying gay and lesbian brothers and sisters, if you had told me in the 1990s that we'd have a black president in this country, if you told me in the 1990s that we'd stop throwing people in jail for cannabis, I would not have believed you. I would not have believed that humans were capable of such incredible leaps of kindness and emotional maturity in just a few short decades. You talk to kids today, and they are shocked at how homophobic we were back when we were kids, which tells me in 20 years, kids are going to be shocked at how transphobic we were back now. Regardless of religion or not, there's so much evidence that we are getting kinder, that we are getting nicer to each other, and that young people now, they don't buy into this Muslim hating bullshit. They've grown up with Muslim kids in their schools. Young people now don't hate immigrants. They know Latinos. It's not as easy as it was in my parents' age. It's not as easy as it was in my age growing up. So I see so much. I mean, think about how many of us have talked so many older parents and grandparents out of homophobia in the last 30 years. There's so much proof that we're getting kinder. And that's what gives me inspiration. Was that the right answer?
Yeah, I mean,
Is that
all
what
of
you?
your
Okay.
answers are great. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Lynn, I'm going to jump to a question into the Q&A. Is that okay? Um, what preemptive strategies beyond one-to-one individual engagement, such as policy, institutional messaging, collective action, might help to limit the power and the growth of these Christian nationalist, charismatic, anti-institution, unaffiliated dudes?
That's a great question. I mean, I'm afraid that I don't have a clean answer because I do think it
Mm,
is about heart to heart. I think it's one heart at a time, one soul at a time, one awakening at a time, one realizing, oh wait, this isn't actually what Jesus talks about. Um,
mm,
you know, my next book is about spotting these signs and about the patterns. I mean, these people who say, "Oh, God told me to," but there's no accountability. These people who call
mm,
mercy weakness. I'm actually working on a formula for my next book on how to call these people out. And the main step is to spot the pattern, recognize when you're seeing people doing Christian nationalism, when they're actually
mm,
serving power, serving Caesar, not serving the actual teachings of Jesus, and then call it out. For a
mm.
long time, I felt uncomfortable with that because I don't get to call somebody else a fake Christian. Who the hell am I, right? Like I'm in the movie Coyote Ugly. I have no moral right to call anybody a fake Christian. I'm a sinner and blah blah blah. And Christians are nice, kind people. Christ followers are nice, kind people. And sometimes they're so nice and so kind that they won't stand up against the people prostituting the religion. And in the interest of love, in the interest of getting along just fine, they will let fascists take over a faith that's led by a guy who said, "Put your sword away and love your enemies and blessed are the peacemakers." And suddenly, we're being so busy being nice. Constantine and the Roman Empire have taken over our movement, and now it's not a nice movement. So I do think that while it makes very uncomfortable, I do believe in calling out people in power as fake Christians. I don't believe in necessarily calling out your neighbor unless they're a hateful person. If they're an actual racist or a hater, then feel free. And it makes me uncomfortable saying fake Christian. It still does. But my next book is going to be all about this because we have to call it out. If we don't call out the fake Christians, we're allowing them to set a world where, again, Martin Luther King Jr. and the KKK are in the same basket. And that's when people don't take religion seriously. I mean, again, it's not just a semantic difference, right? Like Christian nationalism doesn't treat Christianity as a moral philosophy. They treat it as a tribal identity, something you can fuse with state and weaponize against outsiders and legitimize power. It's more of an ideology than a theology. And again, Dr. King and the Klan, they both used Christian language. They both quoted the Bible. They both claimed moral authority, but they were not practicing the same religion in any meaningful or ethical way. And if Christianity is defined by the teachings and example of Jesus, which I think it should be, I don't think it's about how much you worship him. I think he says, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say? So if we can get people to agree that Christianity is anchored in the teachings of Jesus, then you can't have the KKK and Dr. King in the same. One aligns with the core ethic and one totally rejects it. And that distinction matters. If you collapse everything evil done in the name of Christianity into Christianity itself, well, then you're putting the abolitionists with the slavers. You're putting the civil rights leaders with the segregationists. You're putting the anti-war activists with Hitler. So we have to call it out, even if it makes us uncomfortable. And you can do that by asking questions. I do it all the time. Please tell me what specific teaching of Jesus from the Gospels does Donald Trump and the MAGA movement fight for? What specific teachings of Christ did Donald Trump campaign on? Just ask the question. With immigration, God of the Hebrew Scriptures commands us to welcome the stranger. God commands us in the Hebrew Scriptures to treat the alien as one of our own. Jesus goes further and says the individuals and nations will be judged by how they welcome the stranger. I'm not saying we shouldn't have standards on who comes in the country, but the criminalization of migrants, calling them illegals, they're Christian refugees, but we have to make them objects. We have to make them unsympathetic. We can't acknowledge that they're Christian too, so we call them illegals. And that makes it easier for white Christianity to cast them aside the same way they did with slavery. So I just asked my racist uncle, please tell me, why are you and Donald Trump right and God and Jesus are wrong? You don't have to yell. You don't have to hate them. Just ask questions. That'll be very popular one at the cookout, by the way. Try that, everyone. Try that at Thanksgiving.
Could I ask? I mean, there's some great questions, but I think the book is written for us, with the specific goal in mind, which you just touched on. Family can be one of the hardest places to experience conflict. A lot of us are really tied up with our need to belong and that sense of belonging in it, and
Yes.
you don't want to threaten that. And
We can't hate them.
Right? I mean, yeah. I mean, it could be easier to confront a neighbor or even a coworker or a total stranger than it might be to confront your racist uncle. Any tips? Any strategies?
Yeah, center it on Jesus. Center it on Jesus.
But so wait, I will say, you
If
say
you're Christian.
your book is written for atheists and believers, right?
Yeah.
So if I don't come to this conversation with those same tools, then what?
Well, I wrote the book to give people some of the tools for all these different subjects. But again, if you're dealing with someone who is a cruel person and they dress it up in sacred talk to appear virtuous, I mean, that's Pete Hegsетhism. That's the oldest trick in the book. We will wrap cruelty up in sacred language and sanctify it that way. And if you know some of the basic teachings of Jesus, you have a very good ground to build a house of debate on. To be able to say to your loved ones without any hatred in your heart, like how does this square with the brown-skinned Jew who started this movement exactly? How do you reconcile dropping bombs on civilian targets with the man who said, "Turn the other cheek, put away your sword, for those who live by the sword will die by the sword"? Again, you can make them argue with God, make them explain why God is wrong in the book, make them explain why Jesus is wrong in the book, and why the host of Celebrity Apprentice is right. Listen, I'm all about avoiding conflict. Believe me, I know how easy it is, and I know in many cases that a lot of us have to put our soul in a box to bring tranquility into our home lives, and it's a long, slow, painful, lonely way to live. And there are ways that you can coexist with these people if, again, Christianity is what they're using as a cloaking device for hate. Bring it back to the Jesus who started it all, and focus it on that. Focus it on the compassion, on the love, on the empathy, and the actual teachings of Jesus. There's two big quotes that are used by the two great strains of Christianity from the beginning: Matthew 25 and Romans 13. Matthew 25, again, the goats and the sheep, Jesus saying, care for the poor, care for the sick, welcome the stranger, be kind to those in prison. His apostle Paul is writing this letter to the early Roman church when they're all being persecuted, and saying, listen, I want you guys to survive, so please behave yourselves and respect the governing authorities. God put them there. You don't want to get killed. And that one passage has been taken out of context for 2,000 years to justify Christians being obedient to authority. Romans
Yeah.
13 is what they've used. It's what the Nazis used to get Christians to support Hitler. It's what the British used to discourage colonists from having revolution. Romans 13 is what Mike Johnson used in his fight with the Pope last month. When the Pope brought up, you have to welcome the stranger, and Mike Johnson says, the Apostle Paul says we have to respect the governing authorities. It's what they do. They go around Jesus to get to Paul because Paul's hangups suit them more than Jesus's very scary, woke, open-hearted love. Once you spot the patterns and know where they're coming from, a lot of it's based in fear. And again, I think most people who are mean are in pain. I think most people who are cruel have a lot of fear, and there's ways you can build bridges to them without hating. That might move them out of their comfort zone a bit, but you can assert yourself in ways and still be loving.
John, do you think, and I'm going to build off of a question here that Linda put into the Q&A.
Please.
Linda states, how can the Christian nationalists be dealt with, since all they really want to do is have power, get and keep power? But I'm curious, is the argument to convert Christian nationalists, or is the argument that you're going for is for those nuns that you alluded to at the top of the hour? Is it to say, hey, because I know that I get a lot of pushback from my Christian friend or non-Christian friends who say Christianity is the reason, for the evil in all the world. I'm like,
Oh yeah, my atheist friends. Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
and yeah, it's a great argument.
yeah,
It's really understandable why so many people blame religion for all of this. And I have to say all the time, it is a fair critique, but the reality is it's not Christianity responsible for all this war and oppression of women and homophobia. It is extreme conservative fundamentalist right-wing Christianity. The extreme fundamentalism wings of all the world, extreme fundamentalist Jews, extreme fundamentalist Muslims, extreme fundamentalist Christians have always been the problem. They're the ones who believe God likes me better. Violence is okay if I do it. The more extremely conservative your religion is, Hinduism doesn't matter. The more women are second-class citizens, the more you focus on punishment over healing, the more you use this persecution narrative to justify anything you do mean today. It's been done to us, so we get to be cruel to them. All the religions do the same tricks. Far right-wing Christians have more in common with far right-wing Muslims than they do with moderate and liberal Christians. So once you spot these patterns, you know what you're dealing with. And I don't think you can convert them. I don't think it's your job to deprogram a zealot. But the reality is there's more of us. There's more of us. And too many of us are on the sidelines. And they use Christianity as camouflage. And I wrote this book as a camouflage removal guide because they have a First Amendment right to stand there and say that God likes me better. And if you're using Jesus to argue that you're better than somebody else, you don't follow Jesus, because his whole thing is about humility. The entire scam is about using a guy who refused power to get power. And the more we know this, the more young people are taught this, the more women are taught this, the more we can spot the patterns. You don't need to believe in raising the dead and walking on water to recognize the revolutionary ethic behind some of these teachings and to ground your debates and argument in that, because you can't quote Jesus to justify any policy this White House is doing. Even atheists can win on this one
That
using the
John,
Bible.
Right. John, thank you so much for all of that. And thank you to everyone who participated. I'm going to toss it to Nomi to bring us home.
Oh, we're out of time. Oh
But
my God, I'm so
we're out
sorry.
of time. I
I
mean,
do
just
go
like
on and
last time,
on.
right?
I do go on. I'm so sorry.
Well,
It
maybe
would
we'll do it yet again. Third time's a
we
If
charm.
y'all
should
are still speaking to me after this, I'd be honored too. Thank you.
No, it's been a joy.
we should do it again because I think there's so much more we could be discussing. I want to
Well, you
thank
heard he said he's writing another book, so we'll get him
That's
back.
great.
Yes,
That's
please.
great. I want to thank John. I want to thank Ellie and Lynn. I want to thank all of our co-sponsors. There is Katie, our national director, is putting a link in the chat to a survey. Really, it helps us so much if you can take a moment, everybody, to fill out the survey. It helps us with our programming. It just helps us a lot. I want to remind everybody about some of our upcoming programs, our upcoming events. Our next advocacy program is Call With Us, which is we have an ongoing program of Call With Us where it's like advocacy 101. We'll help you figure out who your legislator is. We'll help you figure out how you do legislative advocacy, and we'll review a topic. This one is going to be about supporting the freedom to read without religious coercion. We're advocating to stop House Resolution 7661. So please come and join us for that, and we will, no matter where you live, we'll explain what the issue is and guide you through how to advocate. If you're in Michigan, please join us in person on Friday, April 24th, or that will also be live streamed at the Congregation for Humanistic Judaism of Metro Detroit. You can also join us by live stream. We are so proud, we will be presenting the Constitutional Defender Award to Randy Weingarten, who is the president of American Federation of Teachers. And then on Sunday, April 26th, we only do a fundraiser every 2 years, so we really want to make a splash. If you're in Michigan, then please join us in person. We, of course, will be more than happy to accept donations from anybody, no matter where you live. Katie is putting that in the chat. And again, I always like to say religious freedom is not free.
Right
It
on.
does take money to do these things, and we hardly ever ask for money, and we greatly would appreciate any support. So I want to thank all of you again, especially Lynn and Ellie and John. And since Katie's sound is off, I will also
Thank you,
thank
Katie.
one on her behalf, and thank you, Katie, for organizing this.
I'm just so honored. Thank you all so, so much. This is really a joy for me. I really appreciate what you bring to me, and thank you for letting me come and talk about this stuff and with such an intelligent audience. I'm really grateful.
Nice to see you again. Thank you so much.
Nice to see you. Anytime I can be of service to y'all, let me know.
Oh, we would love to have you again. Love
Great.
it. Love it.
Right on. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Peace.
Thank
Bye.
you.